Okay, I see Megan's thumbs up there. So thank you, Megan. Hi, everybody. Kind greetings and welcome. Oh, continues. Excuse me. Kind greetings and welcome to our special summer conversation, A Better Way to Work, Pope Francis, the Care Economy, and the Future of Work. My name is Michael Murphy, and I direct the Hank Center here at Loyola University Chicago. And on behalf of university leadership and on behalf of the Hank family, whose generous endowment funds our many endeavors, I extend a warm Loyola greeting. I'm also pleased to extend a hearty welcome on behalf of the Vatican Dicastery for promoting integral human development, with a special thanks to Undersecretary for the Faith and Development sector at the Dicastery, Sister Alessandra Smerilli, and our friends at Commonweal magazine and Dominic Preziosi, the editor there, both of whom these communities are co-sponsoring our conversation today. I also want to note what a particular delight it has been to work with Dominic Chai of the Society of Jesus in preparing this event. Dominic serves as co-coordinator of the Vatican COVID-19 Commission's Economy Task Force at the Dicastery and is a visiting scholar here at the Hank Center. And thanks, as always, to our center manager, Megan Toomey, for helping get our many events from farm to table. I remain grateful for your work, Megan. Now, today's topic is as pressing as it is fundamental. As Pope Francis reminds us, care is work, work is care. An insight that illuminates how central care is to and for life itself. From giving birth to raising and educating children to caring for the sick and elderly, the challenge is to broaden our idea of homo economicus and return it really to its fundamental and more expansive meaning. Today, in the aftermath of the global pandemic, if aftermath's the right word, it's probably not. But as we kind of move through this period of our lives, the economic value of care is reemerging starkly for what it's always been, a matter of human dignity and justice. And so reprioritizing care requires new mindsets, from building a world that is socially and environmentally just to reevaluating the meaning of decent work in contemporary life, to developing feasible economic and public policies that place care of people and care of environment at the center of life. I am truly honored and delighted that we have such an esteemed, interdisciplinary, scholarly panel of experts assembled here today who will help us navigate these questions. So before I introduce them, let me just give you a couple of Zoom housekeeping things. It's a meeting we have today. We all know what a meeting is. We're all Zoom experts. So that means that the chat is disabled and you really don't have much latitude except to chat with me. So if you have a question or comment, please, I encourage you, write it as we go, and I will integrate as many as I can in our short time. Really, that's it, except to welcome formally our speakers. I'm going to provide a briefer introduction so we can get going, but here now is our esteemed panel. First, it's Sister Alessandra Smerilli, FMA, daughter of Mary, Help of Christians, that congregation, and bless them and their work. Sister is a full professor of political economy at the Pontifical Faculty of Educational Sciences, Auxilium in Rome. In the last 2 years alone, Sister Smerilli has been appointed by Pope Francis as counselor of the Vatican City State, consultor of the General Secretariat of the Synod of Bishops, and coordinator of the Economic Task Force of the Vatican Commission for COVID-19. Most recently, and congratulations, Sister, on this, in March 2021, Pope Francis appointed Sister as Undersecretary for the Faith and Development sector, of the Dicastery for promoting integral human development. Welcome, Sister Alessandra. Jennifer Nadelsky, our second speaker, is professor at Osgood Hall Law School, York University. Prior to this, she was professor of law and political science at the University of Toronto and professorial fellow at the Institute for Social Justice. Her most recent book, Law's Relations, A Relational Theory of Self Autonomy, and Law from 2011 won the C.B. Macpherson Prize, awarded by the Canadian Political Science Association. She is currently completing a jointly authored manuscript along with Tim Mallison, and this book is called A Care Manifesto, Part Time for All. And this is forthcoming from Oxford very soon. So welcome, Jennifer. Our third speaker, Dr. Maria S. Floro, Professor of Economics at American University in Washington, D.C. Also, Dr. Floro is co-director of the graduate program on gender analysis in economics, which they call the PGAE at American U. Maria has collaborated with researchers, women's groups, and community organizations in Thailand, the Philippines, Ecuador, and Bolivia in conducting fieldwork on vulnerability, gender, and informal employment in urban poor communities. Dr. Floro's current book project, Women's Work in the World Economy and Gender Development and Globalization, Economics as If All People Mattered, is forthcoming. So welcome, Dr. Floro. And I hope I have that book title right. I think that could be 2 books. So I think it's Gender Development and Globalization, Economics as If All People Mattered is forthcoming. That's a great sounding title and needed work. So welcome, Maria. Finally, Dr. Christine Furu-Hinze is Professor of Theological and Social Ethics, Chair of the Department of Theology, Emeritus Director of the Francis and Anne Curran Center for American Catholic Studies at Fordham University. Christine is also President-elect of the Catholic Theological Society of America, which is the largest society of its kind in this country. Her teaching and research focus on foundational and applied ethics, especially the dynamics of social transformation, Catholic social thought, and economic and work justice for vulnerable women, families, and communities. Christine's most recent book is Radical Sufficiency, Work, Livelihood, and a U.S. Catholic Economic Agenda. This just out from Georgetown U Press, 2021. What a panel. Sister Alessandra, thank you so much for supporting this work and for your scholarship. We welcome you to our Zoom stage, and please, best of luck with your remarks.
Thank you very much for inviting me here and for organizing all this panel. And well, as you said, Michael, I am Undersecretary at the Vatican Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. But I'm also the coordinator of the Vatican COVID-19 Commission, the Economic Task Force. And this webinar has been organized in collaboration with the Vatican COVID Commission. This commission was launched by Pope Francis on March 2020 in order to address the economic and social consequences of the pandemic. Pope Francis is urging us to use the coronavirus as a revolutionary opportunity to create a world that is more economically and environmentally just. He asks us to prepare the future, which is different to be prepared for the future, to prepare the future and to be concrete. And we have 3 priorities for the 2021. Food for all, health for all, jobs for all. Jobs for all and the future of work. On these topics, we are working with the representatives of the ILO and ICMC in a project called The Future of Work After Laudato Si. And last year, we produced a report, Care is Work, Work is Care. And we are here today in order to better understand how care is related to work, how care is related to economy, and vice versa. We are here to listen. Our methodology, and as Jesuits, you know it very well, is based on See, Judge, Act. So we are here in the See phase. We want to listen. And so, as co-host of this webinar today, I'm very grateful to be in a panel of experts to engage in a conversation with a philosopher, a theologian, and an economist. And grateful to our co-host, Mike Murphy, for organizing this session and connecting all of us. And talking about economy of care, I'd like to quote Pope Francis, who says, "Care can be understood as taking care of people and nature, offering products and services for the growth of the common good. An economy that takes care for work, creating employment opportunities that not exploit workers." And in Fratelli Tutti, the last encyclical, number 64, we can read, "Let us admit that for all the progress we have made, we are still illiterate when it comes to accompanying, caring for, and supporting the most frail and vulnerable members of our developed societies." So my feeling is that we appreciate care in the private sphere, in private, but not in public. And so we miss something. And then we need a sincere discussion on this topic. So my question for the panelists is, in the wake of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, which has exacerbated conditions of labor, how can we design a care economy that moves towards integral human development? Thank you.
Thank you
Hello,
very much. Yes, pardon me, Jenny, please proceed.
hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here and to talk about my recent work on Part-Time for All, a Care Manifesto. It is really a project about the future of work, and I'm so delighted to be able to present it in this context of a growing recognition that work, the structure of work and the structure of care have always been interdependent. You cannot fix the one without the other. So the pandemic has highlighted, even to those who normally pay very little attention to care, the systemic failures of care, even in the richest countries, most obviously in connection with the elderly, but also with children. And we also have seen dramatically, those who've paid attention have known this for decades, but now it's more evident to everyone, the tremendous inequalities of care, both the burdens of care for those who do it and the benefits of care for those who do and do not receive it. Finally, many people have recognized that in order to get their work done, someone needs to be caring for their families, and indeed for the workers themselves. When schools and daycares close, suddenly people notice that work requires someone doing care. So as people are finally coming to recognize that what we call productive work, paid work, requires care, much of it is unpaid. And the care that is paid is generally paid badly, done with few benefits, and often with abuse all over the world. Women, of course, disproportionately provide that care, both paid and unpaid. But it is not just women who form the denigrated workforce to provide denigrated care. It is whoever is at the bottom of social and economic hierarchies, people who are racialized, immigrants, the poor. It's really important to recognize that in every society, care is organized around hierarchy and thus inequality. And this unequal structure of care further embeds equality in societies. No society can achieve equality if care is denigrated and organized around hierarchy. I often say this, people who are not feminists, who don't care about care, they think they're just working for equality. You cannot get equality if you don't fix the inequalities of care. And finally, on this point, to notice that the denigration of care and those who do it is mutually reinforcing, such that it becomes literally looks natural to see denigrated people doing care, whether they're immigrants, women, racialized people. What we need now is to recognize that we cannot solve the problems of care, neither its inadequacies nor its inequalities, without restructuring work. Work is still organized as if every worker had someone at home to do the care, even though this is now rarely the case. Employers still see the ideal employee as someone who puts work first, such that the demands of work are incompatible with care responsibilities. And this is so despite the fact that the old sexist family wage, ensuring that a man could support his family on 40 hours a week, has long since been abandoned, especially in the Anglo countries. Many families could not survive on a single income, so that this model of the ideal worker who pays only attention to work because there's somebody at home doing the care is just hopelessly antiquated and not something we actually want to revive in that form. So we need a radical change in the structure of work. So my co-author Tom Mallison and I have a specific proposal. Everyone needs to limit their paid work to 30 hours a week maximum. And employers are to be committed to a living wage. Now, the new definition of a living wage is that one person and a child can live on the earnings from 30 hours a week. Now, of course, this is not so different in terms of an economic metric from the old-fashioned living wage of 40 hours for a man. So that's one part, you limit your paid work to 30 hours, but the other part, possibly even more radical, because there are experiments out there on the shorter work weeks, is that everyone, no matter how important their paid work, does around 22 hours a week of unpaid care. Now, when your kids are young or your parents are elderly, most of that care will be done in the intimate circles of friends and family. But the care responsibility, the commitment to 22 hours of unpaid care stays constant. So when your immediate family responsibilities recede, you form communities of care with whom you make mutual commitments of serious daily responsibility for care. This is not to replace professional care when that's needed. It's just to fill in all the many, many forms of care that are needed on a regular basis. And we think that only such a system of limited paid work and unpaid care from everyone can undo the denigration of care. In particular, this system would end one of the most serious problems we face now. It's the problem we call the care policy divide, and it's the one least mentioned in the conventional care literature. And what this means is that our high-level policymakers, both CEOs and corporations and government officials, have almost no experience of care. They just don't do it. They're too important. They don't waste their time. And so they're ignorant about one of the most basic dimensions of human life, and this will inevitably shape their judgments. And it's important to notice that a lot of solutions which are sometimes proposed to the gender divide around care, like wages for housework or pensions for homemakers, they would do nothing to fix this care policy divide. They would make it better for the ones who are doing the care, but they would not shift the norms that important people don't do it. We want our policymakers to be doing care, to have done it all their life, to be informed by it. And we want those who are doing care to have access to those kinds of jobs. Only when everyone recognizes themselves as someone who needs care, which is not currently the case, even though lots of men receive a lot of care and are oblivious to it. Only when everyone recognizes themselves as someone who needs care and someone who is a care provider can we end the denigration of care and the ignorance of policymakers. And of course, when everyone is a caregiver, we can make major inroads against the inequalities now built into our systems of care because everyone is doing it. And we make detailed arguments about the kinds of things one learns from the hands-on daily practice of care, such as the capacity to take the perspectives of others, which are so important in all forms of our judgment and political decision-making. So finally, I want to just say that care for the earth is part of the care responsibility that everyone shares. Everyone needs to learn from the actual practices of caring for the earth, the sense that they are the recipients of Earth's care and bear a responsibility in return. In our urbanized world, very few people actually have a daily experience of this mutual human-earth care relationship. It's not just about sharing the responsibility fairly, that is, equitably distributing the burdens, but as with human-to-human care, what is important is the benefits, the learning that comes from everyone doing care. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Jenny, so much. I don't mean to pop in here, but I want to just hand the floor over to Dr. Florell. Hi, Maria.
Thank you. Jennifer really covered a lot of amazing points, and I would just like add on to some of the important points that she raised. I have been working in the intersection of gender care and macroeconomics in the last few years, with about 40 scholars around the world under a project that I lead called the Care Work and the Economy Project. This research is motivated after observing how efforts to promote inclusive growth and sustainable development are often undermined by the lack of gender awareness and the presence of care in existing policy tools. The invisibility, for example, of the care economy in policy tools such as macroeconomic models has led to the neglect of adequately addressing care needs in an integrated manner. So what do we observe now? We have an emerging care crisis manifested in the form of uncared, elderly, disabled, the sick, and children in societies around the world. This crisis has also taken the form of silent protests against long unpaid work hours performed by women, leading to a decline in marriage rates, fertility rates, and hence a crisis in social reproduction. The care economy, as Jennifer pointed out, underpins the functioning of the economy and the well-being of people and the maintenance and survival of societies. As one prominent economist, Dan Elson, pointed out, if no one had children and took care of families and friends, economies would come to a halt for a lack of labor force, and societies would eventually wither away. Our project focuses on South Korea as the country case study, a country that has industrialized and grew rapidly in the 70s and 80s, but then has witnessed a rapid demographic change. It has the lowest fertility rate in the world today and one of the longest life expectancies. One of our researchers in our project estimated that in South Korea, adults, who are mostly women, provide about 87 million hours of unpaid childcare and elder care each day, which roughly translates to 11 million workers, assuming an 8-hour shift to provide paid care that's equivalent to what they have been providing. And so while economic progress in many parts of the world has enhanced opportunities for women and men to participate in the labor force, and more families have to rely on 2 or more breadwinners, cultural norms and social expectations on women as primary caregivers and homemakers remain resistant to change. Economic and social policies in many parts of the world continue to neglect the realities of women, particularly in low-income households, heavy work burden, and the necessity to help men and women balance employment and household care activities. So as pointed out by Jennifer as well, this global pandemic exposes the heavy demand on those who carry responsibility for providing care for the sick, the young, and the frail elderly. But even before the pandemic, wide income disparities have created diverse types of care arrangements. Those who have the private means or income rely on domestic workers, nannies, and elder care aides, or use daycare centers and nursing homes whose care workers are lowly paid. But for the working poor, hiring domestic help is simply unaffordable, and they are compelled to rely on their own labor or kinship networks or engage their children in domestic work. In some countries, it is typically girls who are removed from school to take care for their younger siblings, thus contributing to household survival at the expense of their education. Or they are sent to the cities to work as domestic helpers. Many poor women migrate from rural to urban areas to provide care for the elderly and the young of more well-to-do families. So what we have is that the quality and adequacy of care received by people within the same country or within the same city or town can therefore be very different. I argue that there is urgent need for public investment in childcare, sick care, and elder care. And there's need for care policies which allocate adequate resources to help caregivers and to people who need care. Some of the care work and economy research papers actually demonstrate the significant impact of government investing in childcare and elder care in generating employment, reduction of income poverty, and the gender earnings gap. For example, the study in Turkey shows that women who are full-time homemakers are beneficiaries of the new jobs created in the childcare sector. Their household work can be reduced by as much as 23%. And the new earnings generated through job creation in the early childhood education and childcare facilities can help narrow the gender earnings gap. Expanding public investment in elder care, as well adopting labor policies that address gender wage discrimination in the labor market, can improve the well-being of households with care responsibilities, freeing up time for women for jobs that match their education and raising women's wages relative to men's. What these studies in the care economy have shown is that the market economy, which we refer to as the gross domestic product and which we are so focused on in terms of measuring economic growth, runs on unpaid care work of women and lowly paid care workers. It is a fact that domestic workers, child care and elder care workers are among the lowly paid, and many don't have benefits or social insurance. There are reasons as to why societies take the care economy for granted, and governments fail to address the growing strains faced by many families in meeting their care needs. These reasons are typically framed as follows. Questions such as, why should I have to pay for someone else's care responsibility? Or they simply say it's a private and family matter. The neglect of addressing care provisioning as common good is underpinned by prevailing notions of family values that see family-dominated care provision as being in accord with values of family solidarity, family obligations to raise children and care for the elders, and the socially ascribed role for women. Hence, governments and societies find nothing wrong with the unequal care burden within households and the lack of government support for care services. In fact, in some developing countries, public investment in care provisioning and organized care provision is viewed as, oh my goodness, a Western feminist approach that is incompatible with our cultural norms and religious beliefs, and therefore merit little thought. However, demographic and epidemiological projections highlight the already large and rapidly growing size of older populations around the world. For example, in sub-Saharan Africa, it's expected that the share of adults aged 60 and older is going to double by 2050. In absolute numbers, older people in sub-Saharan Africa will rise more sharply than anywhere else, from 46 million today to 166 million by mid-century. With large numbers of these elderly unable to master essential tasks of daily life independently and requiring long-term care. So these realities highlight the major faults in family-dominated care provisioning. The pressures on family care systems will only deepen, moreover, with spread of pandemics, continued rural, urban, and international migration stimulated by persistent wealth disparities and unbalanced economic growth. So what does family values in caregiving then mean? To me, it refers to a broader notion of who is the family. It is the entire community of people who respects and value the well-being of each person in society. It therefore means that the governing body of that community, and I refer to the governments, must ensure that quality care is accessed by all society's dependents, young children, the sick and disabled, and the frail elderly. Country leaders must take on the task of mobilization and allocation of adequate resources to meet this important need. While the family serves as a basic unit for caregiving, there is need for men to take on more of the care work burden as part of their duty as husbands, sons, and brothers. And policies must ensure that both women and men are able to have a healthy work-life balance. Thank you.
I want to thank, Christine, you're ready to go. Dr. Hinsey, thank you, Maria.
Hello, and thank you for being here today. I want to thank Michael Murphy and the Hank Center and my co-panelists, in particular today, Sister Alessandra and the Vatican COVID-19 Commission, for your serious and forward-looking attention to the topics we're addressing today. Coming back around to our modern Catholic social tradition, I believe it really has so much to offer to and also to learn from these urgent and interdisciplinary discussions about the care economy that we just heard marvelously presented by Professors Smerli, Floro, and Nadelsky. In my own work, I've tried to build bridges between Catholic social thought, feminist ethics, and social economics to advance what the tradition calls integral human development for people and communities through our household and public economic relationships and activities. Like care economists, modern Catholic social thought embraces a classical understanding, and here we're going to the more foundational level, like what's the economy for? What is work for? Of economy's purpose as oikonomia, the root meaning of the word economy, household management for the provisioning of all members. Work in our tradition is regarded as natural to humans. Pope Pius XI once wrote that a person is made to work as a bird is made to fly. And work here denotes activities, paid or not, by which we provide for our embodied needs, we develop and use our gifts and our abilities, and we contribute to the common good. This notion of work includes care work that we've been discussing today, labor that tends to our vulnerabilities and interdependencies as embodied persons, which is a fundamental aspect of care work. The work of care is rarely glorious or glamorous, but as the work that enables survival and enables all the other works that we humans do, care work is necessary and it's an authentic human good. And for Christians, it's a way of participating in God's creative and sustaining action. For Catholic thought, the God-given dignity of every person and our human interconnectedness within a common earthly home, and notice that isn't just a religious view because you've heard it from our economist and from our law professor, ground the right to economic participation and receiving enough sufficiency through your economic activity, attained through dignified labor, both in the household and in the public waged economy. However, as we've been hearing, market economies today overlook or conceal care work's indispensable social and economic role and contribution. Public waged work is valorized, but unpaid care work often seen as women's natural work, or as Jennifer said, as the natural work of people who are less or other or less important, performed in the private family sphere, is invisible in measures of the gross economic product. Market success, as again we've heard, depends on performing as an ideal worker, laboring in a way that is unencumbered by off-the-job relationships or constraints. But in fact, the ideal worker is a mythic creature whose public economic performance always depends on the non-mythic toil and backstage support of a whole cadre of unpaid, familial, or low-paid care workers. Notice how in our culture we ask people, do you work, particularly women? That's a clear symbol of the fact that work that counts is paid wage work. All this other work that upholds the rest of the whole economy is not considered real work too often. Care-focused waged work at the same time, if you're working in these kinds of jobs, it's low prestige and poorly paid, particularly that work performed by women, which often involves dealing with our bodies' messiness or dirt. The higher status your job, the more removed you are from bodily messiness and dirt in our culture. These kinds of care-related jobs that connect us to bodies include childcare, cleaning, housekeeping, food service, young child education, and hands-on care for the frail, ill, and elderly. Significantly, a recent ILO study concludes that, and this has to do with the justice issue, unpaid or poorly paid care work entails a systematic transfer of hidden subsidies to the rest of the economy that go unrecognized and impose a systemic time and economic tax on women in particular, or more vulnerable folks who perform this throughout their life cycle. Paid daily by everyone who is engaged in care work, this tax is actually a form of structural exploitation that occurs across developed and developing economies, as we've heard. This setup perpetuates a pervasive kind of inequality, and it's structural. It's not something that anybody's intentionally doing in our modern economic setup. And the harshest impacts of these inequities caused by the current system fall on those least able to absorb them, the poorest and the most vulnerable women and families. It may be hard for me to organize my work and family life, but if you're a person in a shack on the outskirts of Lima, Peru, who has to leave their little child to go to the factory and work 12 hours, that's a different situation entirely. In this regard, recent popes have described women, when we talk about women in work, simultaneously as men's social equals and as having distinctive feminine contributions to make to the world, especially within the sphere of the care economy and home and family. However, Catholic teaching insufficiently addresses these morally problematic tensions between, on the one hand, the interdependence of the waged and household economies, as Jennifer was talking about, and on the other hand, a system that locates economic value and power in the first economy, the waged, while relying upon and undervaluing the contributions of the other, the unwaged, and also genders those. In every country today, women's heavier responsibilities for unpaid household labor and disproportionately presence in poorly remunerated care work carry economic and social penalties that entrench inequity and exploitation. These problems are reflected, but they're not confronted in the mix of equal rights and participation talk and gender complementarity talk that we find in most recent Catholic teaching concerning women, family, and work. Most salutarily, though, Catholic social thought espouses an inclusive, provisioning economic paradigm that subordinates productivity, growth, and profit-making to economy's primary goal, which is participation through dignified work and access to livelihood for all, a livelihood marked by sufficiency, security, status, and ecological sustainability for everyone in every community. Advancing this, what you could call a radical sufficiency economic paradigm, requires that we prioritize the provision of enough to everybody over the gaining and keeping of ever more for some. It requires critical masses of people to throw our shoulders against the grain of the current setup, which reifies market logics, undervalues care, and marginalizes non-elite workers. For Catholic thought, this further requires cultivating solidarity, an open-handed and open-hearted spiritual and economic posture with the courage to resist our, especially those of us who are more privileged, our knee-jerk tendencies to grasp and cling to a familiar status quo, which in many ways, is working okay, at least for us, and to pursue instead significant changes in our business as usual. Something that we heard beautifully expressed by my previous panelist. Meanwhile, faced with care's everyday immediacy and its urgent necessity, a toddler crying, an Alzheimer's patient moaning, those needs can't just wait. So care workers tolerate inequities, and they continue to perform their life-sustaining labors. Since nobody survives without continuous care work, to pursue equity for the care economy, which is what we're calling for here, it's as if, to quote Joan Williams, we're in a boat trying to rebuild it, but we have to preserve all we can because we're in the middle of the sea. Nobody sees more clearly how precious and fragile is the cargo that this leaky boat carries, our present system, than those who are assigned to care about care. But in a just economy, both our religious and our human sensibilities tell us caring about and performing and ensuring equitable support for care work is a job assignment that applies to everybody. Thank you.
All right, I'm clapping, and I see a room full of people clapping with all these wonderful presentations. I wanted to just allow a few minutes here for just some kind of quicker responses from our panelists to each other. I do love the keystone that Sister Alessandra has laid out to see. We're seeing things and we're hearing each other. So what did you hear in your co-panelists? Please, Maria or Jenny. Go ahead, Jenny.
Okay, thank you. First of all, it was just such a pleasure to be part of this panel where all of these presentations, each different, work together so perfectly. But I want to highlight one potential difference. It's certainly a difference between me and many traditional secular feminists, and that is the focus on the state provision of formal care. So in Canada, we hear a lot of talk about, well, okay, let's finally get, federally funded daycare, and that will solve our problems. That's how we'll fix things. And because state funded care is so underfunded everywhere, it does need a lot more funding everywhere, but it is not, from my point of view, the main solution. And I actually think that if people understood the possibility of what we're proposing with Part-Time for All, that a lot of intimate care would take place in families and among close friends and close communities. It would be person to person. It would be outside the market, not paid, outside the state, and often outside the family as well, in wider communities, the formal family. People would be more willing to support formal care if they didn't think it was meant to usurp the personal connections of family care. And so I think that's a big part of what I think our project offers, is to situate formal state-paid care in this wider context of everyone participating in unpaid care.
I want to encourage, just please jump in.
Okay.
No one needs me to.
Well, yeah, Jennifer, thank you for actually situating my proposition, or what a lot of the economists are proposing. But there are a couple of things I want to mention. First of all, it's really this neglect of any kind of infrastructure or subsidy, even for early childhood education, that is basically needed. And also the fact that what we have seen in, certainly it's true, you don't want paid care to substitute for the family care. That's not the point. I think the point is that you want some of the hard, long hours of unpaid care to be more pleasant for the families. So you hire someone to help you with the dressing, with the feeding, with some of the day-to-day chores, and the family can devote more time to reading to the children, to spending time with them in a way that they think is going to be developmental. So it's really a complementarity as opposed to just a substitute. That said, I still think that is very important. I mean, we live in a country, in the United States, where there's no childcare bill whatsoever. And the first time you have here in the Biden proposal is to at least provide some infrastructure for childcare and elder care and long-term care support. It is so badly needed. But you're absolutely right. It's not a panacea for addressing all of the care issues. At the end of the day, this important proposal of having labor policies, which may include your proposal of reducing, hours of work, that enable households, include men and women in those households, to be able to balance employment and their family life and work, is very important. I think they have to be in a comprehensive package to address the issue of care. Thank you.
I don't know if Sister wants to jump in. I would just say that what Jennifer is talking about on the more fundamental level of shifting the way we see things about what goes on in our economy is very much along the lines of what I see Catholic thought leading toward as well. It's also interesting that our secular society, in instituting the male breadwinner family wage, was working with an intuition that you need an adult to be in the care economy of the home, and you need somebody out there making the money, and it should be a limited amount of hours outside the home. And so, as you said, Jennifer, your proposal is in a certain way a degendered way of looking at how do we limit the hours of work outside the home so we can do the unpaid work of the care economy. Just as Maria said too, just replacing it with paid care, that's not what any of us are talking about here. And yet there's a key role for the government and for policy and for infrastructure and shifts in business policy, right? For this to even be able to happen. We live in a world where a good job, even as a professor, implies all I do is work. I love my job. And so I spend so many hours at my job. And as Catholics, I think we fall into the vocation trap, right? Because we're doing good work in the world. And therefore, when should we stop? Never, right? But a more thoughtful way of thinking about, paid and unpaid work and limiting our overworkism, especially in the US, it fits into these more fundamental levels. And it's such great policy insights from my co-panelists.
Yes, I just want to say, Jennifer, please come back. Thank you.
Thank you. So just following up on the importance of fixing work so that all of these things can actually happen. And I should say that in our proposal, we talk about norms and not law. So we're not envisioning a maximum 30 hours because this, in the current economy, this would be a problem. We also stipulate the need for economic security, which I didn't try to go into here. So norms, but I want to reiterate that there are important organizations out there. There's one called Pro Mundo, which is all about getting men to take up 50% of the work, but they say nothing about restructuring paid work. How is that possible? It just can't happen. And then one final little quibble with what Professor Flores said, which is in our proposal, we do not want a system where rich people hire poor people to do the crummy work, to do the dirty work so that they can have fun reading stories to their kids, because this reinforces a hierarchy of what kind of care matters and who should do it, a very, very old hierarchy, which has been not just gendered, but racialized. And so we recommend a norm against the division of labor. And finally, I just want to say one other thing, which I think these points are so important because these are places I'm very active in my little congregation of the United Church of Canada. And these are all issues where we could really see ecumenical cooperation, which has a little bit fallen by the wayside over the last 20, 30 years. And these are topics around which it could be rebuilt.
2 points. One is that we have to connect this issue of work with not just norms, but also the expectations and desires. This aim for more material consumption. This is what's driving people. I'll stay on working. I'll have 2 jobs because I have to have more of this. So it goes even beyond just the issue of work into what are you aspiring for, right? And that also means in terms of, the economy, sort of preoccupation with material, based consumption requires that. Then the other point that you raised, I think there's room for paid care, but you have to have paid carers that have decent jobs. I mean, I went to Switzerland and I hired somebody to take care of my 6-year-old. At that time, when I was giving a talk, I was shocked when I had to pay $22 per hour for a graduate student to look after my child. But that's what we mean. We pay what we value. We pay such low wages because we think care is not important, right? We will pay high thing for some cosmetic surgeon, but we will not pay anything to care. There's a study that was done. Dishwashers and garage attendants in the United States are paid higher than child care workers in the formal sector. These are not the babysitters. What does that mean? We pay more for somebody to wash our dishes and to look after our cars than to look after our children. So I think we need to go back to that point of decent work as well.
And those jobs you mentioned are dirty work done by men, generally speaking.
Thank you. Great points all, and necessary for us to reflect upon. You can see how fast our time is moving. We need weeks on this, and then we need action. I want to get some of our viewers in. Anne from Seattle asks or observes, what COVID-19 has made irrefutably clear is about how important the care economy is. It seems as if all of these invisible people became visible all of a sudden. Any thoughts quickly from the panel on that? Maybe that could be a text without comment. I want to say that there's our colleague Kathleen Moss-Weigert from Loyola has a question. How can we calculate the wage or salary we pay to those who do care in someone else's home? Are there any economics on that? Any models that you work from? Maria, we talked about this earlier. In many ways, the care economy is a growth industry. How does that square?
Okay, a couple of things. One, much of the care industry we observe, for example, in the United States and also to some extent in Korea, is a private for-profit. Okay, so what you have is a for-profit kind of paid care sectors. And, if you're going to do it for-profit, you're going to find ways to increase your profits. So there's a tendency to either minimize the cost or have poor working conditions. Instead of taking care of 6 dementia patients, you're going to be taking care of 10 dementia patients. Okay, so there are issues about working conditions that we ought to pay attention to. And that is important as well. I think I lost the question already in terms of my answer, but there are several ways of measuring. I mean, economists come up with ways of monetizing things, right? Even the unpaid care work. Some argue, well, we used opportunity costs, but then there's a problem with that. When, a doctor spending and a lawyer spending time 1 hour with a childcare versus a full-time housewife who doesn't have any income at all. What's the opportunity cost, right? They're going to be vastly different. That doesn't tell you about care. The other argument is that, well, what's the replacement cost? I mean, if I hire a babysitter for $6 an hour, maybe that's the price that we ought to use, the replacement cost. But care work is so devalued and undervalued because they see it as, it's a women's job. It can be done by an unpaid person. Then the price is so low. So you get caught in this kind of a circle that doesn't allow circular reasoning, that doesn't allow you to truly value care. I think there is a whole debate now within economics, at least those working on care, as to what really is the value of care and how it ought to be mentioned. I think we are learning a lot. Economists don't really understand human behavior and skills. We think we do, We are arrogant about it. I'm speaking for my profession. Some of them may not like what I'm here saying, but you know, there is this emotional aspect, intelligence. A person who is not educated, doesn't have a master's degree, can care more for a frail elderly and a young child than somebody with a master's. So what are we measuring here in terms of skills? And that skills in terms of productivity, there's also this issue. What's your productivity? Okay, if I take care of 10 dementia patients in an hour, am I productive? But boy, how do I do that? Somebody wants to go to the bathroom. What do I do with the other 9 that may be going all around, right? So this notion of productivity, this notion of quality, we have yet to unpack and learn. So that's all I'm saying.
Wow, that's wonderful. Well, to another economist, Sister Alessandra, how do you, we're gonna, we want to keep the time here, but Sister Alessandra, what do you think? You've heard all these insights. What do you think?
Well, I think this conversation has been amazing and I like it. And I think we have to organize, we should organize at least other 3 or 4 webinars on each specific topics. And well, I think I learned a lot today. From Jennifer, I learned and I heard that work and care are interdependent and are always been that. And no society can achieve equality unless everyone has to do with care. From Maria, I heard that we shouldn't take care in the economy as granted. And I like this, we must work towards communities of care. I learned from Christine that what is needed is a meaningful participation through dignified work and the cultivation of solidarity. But putting together everything, I have just 4 small points. First one, we started saying, everyone said, care is invisible, neglected, denigrated, is an subsidy, and so on. So, but at the same time, we know that care is vital. We need care and we need to care about others. And we know that norms about care and work are social norms, so made by us as a community, and so that they can change, they can. The matter is how. So maybe we can have another conversation on how we can go toward this transition. And third point, care is a matter for the entire community. It's for every one of us, men, women, children, elderly people. Everyone needs care. Everyone can take care. And so I heard some proposals. I like Jennifer's proposal, and I think we can do something about that on restructuring work, part-time for all, care for all. Unless everyone is involved in this, we can't change the system. And we need public investments, yes. We need regulations. We need to work in the education. I mean, we need to grow as person in not to be workaholic. I mean, that learning that life is more than work, and work is dignity, but also care is dignity. And so we need to put them together. But from the last points, I'm learning that maybe we have to restructure the economic thought. And quoting Kate Raworth, the author of the Donuts Economics, at the beginning of her book, she says, we are used to think that good is upward, good is rightward. In our schemes, you know, we are going well if we go towards up, the high, and towards rise. And she said, maybe we should change our way of thinking and imagining economics, and maybe good is in equilibrium when we are in an equilibrium. So thank you for this.
Thank you, Sister Alessandra, a hand for all. It's so wonderful to be in dialogue with the dicastery and with the Vatican, and have these great scholars really lend their insights and then all of our energy to make these changes to what's so self-evident that we have to do in the interest of care and love. So thank you, Dr. Maria Floro. Thank you, Dr. Christine Fuhr-Hinze. Thank you, Dr. Jennifer Nadelsky. Thank you, Sister Alessandra Smerilli. Thank you, Dominic Chai, and Megan, of course, and Adam High, who is our new graduate student assistant. I wish blessings upon all and a lovely summer to you. Peace be with you. Boy, that time went by so fast.